He was just doing his job, but when they refused to be served, the owner made a choice that would change everything. Cedar and Sage was the kind of place where the hum of conversation blended with the clinking of cutlery like background music in a well-composed scene. Sunlight filtered through the wide glass windows, warming the oak floors and bouncing off the brass fixtures. The faint scent of rosemary, garlic, and sourdough drifted through the air, grounding every customer in something both homey and quietly elegant. It was Saturday afternoon, slow, golden, and generous. Malik moved through the restaurant like he belonged to its rhythm. He was 22 with eyes that noticed everything and a presence so unassuming it was almost easy to overlook, until you paid attention. Then you noticed the way he remembered a regular's coffee order without being asked, how he kneeled gently when speaking to children at eye level, how he refilled a water glass not out of obligation but out of care. Malik never rushed. Every gesture, every word carried a softness that came not from passivity but from pride. He wore the uniform well, black apron over a crisp white shirt, sleeves rolled precisely to the forearm. His short hair was neat, his shoes spotless. But it wasn't his appearance that made people adore him. It was something quieter, deeper. A kind of grace that couldn't be taught. Malik carried plates with quiet pride, not just because it was his job, but because food to him was love, and service was dignity. Born and raised in the east side of town, Malik had been working at Cedar and Sage for just over a year. It started as a part-time job, something to pay bills, help his mother out, and stash away whatever coins he could toward a dream that, on most days, felt too big to name out loud. Culinary school. He didn't tell many people, but his phone's lock screen showed a picture of the kitchen at the Le Cordon Bleu campus in Chicago. That was his North Star, and every tray of roasted chicken he brought to a table, every bowl of butternut soup he placed with care, was a step closer. Rachel, the restaurant's owner, noticed this in him. She was in her mid-50s, with short silver hair always pulled into a tidy bun and laugh lines that told the story of someone who'd lived many lives and still chose kindness. To most, Rachel was the boss. To her staff, she was a steady hand in a world that often shook too hard. She treated everyone like family, not in the scripted, performative way some managers did, but with the deep, lived-in loyalty that came from seeing her team as people before employees. And with Malik there was a quiet fondness. Not favoritism, but a kind of respect born of recognition. She saw his ambition, even when he tried to hide it behind humility. She saw how he stayed late sometimes, scrubbing the kitchen counters as though preparing for a Michelin inspection, even when no one was watching, and she never said it aloud, but she remembered what it was like to be a young dreamer working in someone else's kitchen. The restaurant buzzed gently that afternoon. Couples leaned in over glasses of iced tea, children colored on menus with borrowed crayons, and a warm breeze slipped in each time the front door opened. Jazz played low from a hidden speaker, Coltrane maybe, and everything felt whole. Malik glided between tables, taking orders with a soft smile and a notepad worn at the edges. A regular, Mr. Benton, an older man with a thick southern drawl, waved him over and gave his usual nod. "Afternoon, Malik. You got any of them apple tarts today?" "Yes, sir," Malik replied. "Just came out of the oven 20 minutes ago. Still warm? You know what I like?" Mr. Benton smiled. "You ever forget, I'll start thinking you're someone else." Malik chuckled. "Not a chance, sir." Small exchanges like this wove the fabric of his days. Nothing extravagant, just warmth in bite-sized moments. There was something sacred about being known even in such simple ways. Behind the counter, Rachel watched the dining room like a conductor watching her orchestra. She didn't micromanage, but she saw everything. The napkin that needed replacing, the couple waiting too long for menus, the hostess who needed a quick break. She saw Malik pause by the kitchen, close his eyes for half a second as he inhaled, the scent of fresh bread cooling on the rack. She smiled. Business was steady. The day was smooth. And for a few precious hours the world outside the walls of Cedar and Sage felt far away. Less sharp, less cruel. Neither Rachel nor Malik knew that something was about to happen that would shift the rhythm of this place entirely. But, For now, in the hush of that perfect afternoon with the sun pouring like honey through the windows and the jazz humming softly above the clatter of plates, they stood in a kind of peace neither of them would soon forget. The afternoon sun still hung high, casting warm golden patches across the polished floor of cedar and sage. The hum of contented diners filled the space, punctuated by laughter and the soft scrape of silverware. Malik had just dropped off a basket of rosemary focaccia at table 6 when the front door opened again, letting in a burst of heat and a different kind of energy. 3 customers walked in, 2 men and a woman, all in tailored clothes that whispered luxury. The woman's heels clicked like punctuation marks on the tile, and one of the men wore sunglasses indoors as though shielding himself from something far brighter than the midday light. They didn't look around the restaurant as most first-timers did. No curious glances at the hand-chalked menu on the wall, no smiles. Just a glance at the hostess, a clipped nod, and an expectation that space would bend to them. "Table for 3? Grace, the hostess, asked warmly. The woman barely nodded, checking her phone. One of the men muttered, "By a window if you have it." Grace led them to a corner table, and Malik, noticing the new arrival, instinctively reached for his notepad. His steps were calm, steady. He approached the table with the same openness he gave everyone, because to him, service wasn't about hierarchy, it was about welcome. "Good afternoon," he said with a soft smile. "How are you 3 doing today? Can I start you off with something to drink?" There was a pause. The woman looked up at him for the first time, really looked, and something shifted in her expression. It was subtle, but unmistakable, like a curtain being drawn shut. The man in sunglasses took his off slowly, revealing narrowed eyes. His lips pressed into a line before he looked at his companions, then back at Malik. "We'll need a moment," he said curtly, as if dismissing him. "Of course," Malik said, still smiling, though a little less brightly now. "Just wave me over when you're ready." He turned, walking back toward the counter, feeling a chill on his back despite the warmth in the room. At the table, hushed voices began murmuring. They leaned in close, whispering not like friends but like jurors. Malik didn't try to listen, but he didn't have to. You could feel it when you were being picked apart. When you weren't being spoken to. Only about. A minute later, the woman stood abruptly and walked over to the hostess stand. Grace straightened up. "Is there a different server available?" the woman asked, her voice smooth but cold. Grace blinked. "Malik is assigned to your section today." "I see," the woman replied, glancing toward Malik. "Could someone else take our table?" Grace hesitated. "I'm sorry, ma'am, we're a bit short today. Malik is one of our best." That was it. No shouting, no accusations. Just a long silence, the kind that stretches far beyond words. Then the woman turned, nodded at the men, and without another word, the 3 gathered their things, pushed in their chairs, and walked out. The bell above the door jingled cheerfully, unaware of the weight it carried. Silence rippled through the dining room like a dropped glass. A woman at a nearby table paused mid-bite. A child stopped coloring. The air shifted, dense with something unspoken but deeply understood. Malik stood rooted near the drink station, his notepad still in hand, his mouth slightly open as though he might say something. But what was there to say? It wasn't a scene. Not the kind that gets recorded or replayed. There was no shouting, no slurs, no overt cruelty, just a quiet dismissal wrapped in politeness. That made it worse somehow. It gave no one permission to be outraged, and yet everyone felt it. It wasn't what they said. It was how they looked at him, like he didn't belong in the room where he served them. Malik didn't flinch, didn't storm off. He simply lowered his eyes, let out a slow breath, and gently tucked the notepad into his apron. He turned toward the kitchen, his spine straight, his face blank in a way that cost effort. Only someone who had practiced swallowing shame without choking on it could carry themselves like that. Behind him, Rachel had emerged from the back, sensing the shift in the room. She watched the door swing shut, then scanned the restaurant. The Energy had dipped like a dropped violin string. "Malik?" she asked gently. He turned, forced a half-smile. "It's okay. They just wanted someone else." Rachel's eyes narrowed slightly. She wasn't easily fooled, but she said nothing. Not yet. At the counter, Grace stared at her hands, furious and unsure if she should be. Across the room, a man at table 6 shook his head, muttering something under his breath. His wife reached over and held his hand. No, one quite knew what to do, because nothing had really happened, not in the way the world usually measures wrong, and that's what made it so heavy. Malik returned to his next table with the same grace as before, but something had shifted inside him, like a plate balanced too long on a shaky edge. And Rachel watched him from across the room, something stirring in her that wouldn't settle. The air was too still now, and nothing about the golden afternoon felt peaceful anymore. Rachel stepped out from the kitchen just as the door closed behind the departing customers. She hadn't seen what happened, but she didn't need to. She could read a room the way a pianist reads sheet music, every note, every silence. And now, the air in Cedar and Sage had a strange stillness to it. Not quiet exactly. Quiet had peace in it. This was something else. She scanned the tables, then found Malik. He was moving mechanically now, wiping down an already clean table with exaggerated care, his back a little too straight, his smile practiced, polished. From across the room, Rachel could see the tension in his shoulders, the way he bent ever so slightly inward, as if trying to fold himself out of the frame. She crossed the floor, footsteps soft against the wood. Nearby, a waitress named Danielle was restocking coffee cups behind the counter. Her eyes flicked toward Rachel, then Malik, then back again. Rachel stopped beside her. "What happened?" she asked, quiet. Danielle hesitated, glanced around, then leaned in slightly. "That couple, the ones that left? They asked not to be served by Malik." Rachel's lips parted slightly. "Did they say why?" Danielle shook her head. "Didn't have to." She paused, voice low. "It's not the first time something like that's happened to him." Rachel stiffened, her breath catching in her chest. Danielle continued. "There've been a few. You weren't always here when it happened, but yeah. People look at him a certain way sometimes, then ask for someone else or just leave. He always shrugs it off, says it's no big deal." Rachel turned toward Malik, who was now folding napkins, behind the counter, eyes focused on the task like it was all that mattered in the world. She walked toward him slowly. "Malik," she said gently. He looked up, startled for just a second, then relaxed his features into something close to a smile. "It's okay," he said quickly, before she could even speak. "They weren't rude, just didn't want me, I guess." He shrugged, like it didn't matter, like it didn't sting. But the way he held his breath at the end of the sentence gave him away. Rachel studied him in silence. There was something profoundly painful about watching someone preemptively comfort you about something that had just happened to them. Like they'd already rehearsed how to minimize their own hurt, to make it easier for everyone else. "Does this happen often?" she asked carefully. Malik hesitated. "Sometimes. Yeah." His voice was calm, but there was a weariness under it. The kind that doesn't come from one bad day, but from accumulation. Little paper cuts that never had. Time to heal before the next one came. "I try not to take it personal," he added. "People just have their preferences." Rachel's brow furrowed. "Malik." He looked at her then, really looked, and for a second, the practiced composure slipped. Just enough to see the sadness behind it. The quiet question that had no answer. Why am I not enough for them to stay? Rachel turned her gaze toward the front door, still swinging slightly from where the customers had exited. Her face was unreadable, not angry, not tearful, but still sharp, like glass right before it breaks. "Okay isn't the same as right," she said quietly. Malik gave a soft exhale through his nose. Not quite a laugh. More like surrender. I know, he said. Rachel didn't respond. Not right away. Her eyes were still fixed on the door. There was something building behind her stillness, something that hadn't quite reached the surface yet. But Malik could feel it. The same way you can sense when a storm is forming on the edge of a clear sky. Behind them, the restaurant had slowly returned to motion, but not completely. Diners spoke in softer voices. A child dropped a fork and looked up nervously. Danielle moved with more purpose now, stacking cups too loudly as if trying to fill the space with anything other than silence. Rachel turned back to Malik, her voice even. Take a breather. 10 minutes. You don't have to keep pretending nothing happened. Malik opened his mouth to protest but stopped. He nodded once and stepped into the break area, his steps heavy but controlled. Rachel stayed behind the counter, one hand gripping the edge so tightly her knuckles turned white. She glanced at Danielle. Who else has said something? She asked, voice barely above a whisper. Danielle hesitated, then slowly rattled off a few instances. A couple that left without ordering. A man who left no tip and complained to Grace. About attitude, even though Malik hadn't spoken more than 3 sentences. A table that asked if anyone else was available because they couldn't understand his accent. Even though Malik spoke more clearly than half the staff. Rachel listened to each detail without interrupting. But her breath had changed. Slower, deeper, calculated, and then she was silent. Inside her, something shifted. A line, maybe. One that had been quietly tested too many times. She looked out at the dining room again. Same golden light, same music, same scent of garlic bread, but everything felt different now. And she knew with absolute certainty that pretending nothing had happened would be the last thing she would do. Rachel stood behind the counter, one hand still gripping the edge, her mind burning with everything unspoken. The door had long stopped swinging, but its echo remained. Malik was in the break room, silent behind a thin wall. And the restaurant, the space she'd built with care, laughter, and long nights, suddenly felt like it had let something dark walk through its doors and sit at its tables without protest. She inhaled once, deeply. Then she stepped forward. Her voice, when it rang out across the dining room, was calm, but unmistakably firm. Everyone, she said. Excuse me. Can I have your attention, please? Forks clinked against plates. Conversations paused mid-sentence. A toddler twisted in his seat to look up at her. Staff members looked up from drink trays, half-finished orders in hand. Rachel's eyes swept across the room, at faces she knew, faces she'd just met, and the empty chairs where injustice had briefly taken a seat. We're closing, she said. A beat of silence, then Danielle blinked. You mean, for a break or? No. Rachel's voice didn't waver. We're closing the restaurant, right now. A collective murmur rolled through the room like distant thunder. Someone at table 2 frowned in confusion. Excuse me? Rachel turned toward the diners, her expression softening but only slightly. We'll cover your meals today, she said. Every single one. You don't owe us anything. But we're closing for the rest of the day, I hope you understand. There was another pause. Longer this time. And then, clapping. It started hesitantly, from an older man near the window. Then, another diner joined in. A woman placed her fork down and gave a solemn nod of agreement, her eyes meeting Rachel's. A couple near the back stood and applauded gently, their child watching with wide, curious eyes. Not everyone joined. A few looked puzzled, gathered their belongings in quiet discomfort and slipped out without saying a word. But no one argued. Rachel waited until the room settled. Then she turned to her staff. Back room. Now, please. The employees moved, like waves following a current, half unsure what was happening but pulled by the gravity in Rachel's tone. They gathered in the narrow staff break room, bare walls, old coffee maker humming in the corner, the smell of citrus cleaner lingering in the air. Malik was already there, standing stiffly by the fridge, arms crossed over his apron. He looked at her, confused. Rachel didn't sit. She stood in front of her staff, hands clasped, her jaw tight. Her voice, when she finally spoke, came low and steady, but with a tremble beneath it, like a chord struck hard and held just a moment too long. "No, you're all wondering what this is about." No one spoke. She looked at Malik. Today wasn't the first time someone treated him like he didn't belong here. But it's going to be the last time we pretend it's okay. Malik lowered his gaze, embarrassed, but not surprised. Rachel's breath caught in her chest, but she pressed forward. "We serve food with love here," she said. "That's what this place has always been about. And if that's true, if it really means something, then we can't let hate sit at our tables. We can't, not quietly, not politely, not again." Her voice cracked slightly. She paused, took a deep breath, then went on. "I needed everyone in this room to feel the weight of what just happened, not because it was loud or ugly, but because it was quiet, dismissive, comfortable, the kind of hate that puts on a smile and a clean suit and still tells someone they don't belong." A silence stretched through the room. Danielle wiped at her eyes quickly, pretending not to. Rachel looked at Malik again. "You show up every day and give this place your whole heart. You treat people better than they deserve, and we let you stand there, alone, too many times. I'm sorry." Malik's mouth opened slightly, but nothing came out. "I don't want this to be a restaurant where we only talk about values when it's easy," Rachel continued. "If we're going to say we're a family here, then that has to mean something." She looked around the room, at dishwashers and servers, cooks and bussers, people who had given hours and sweat and sometimes tears to keep this place alive. "So, we're closing today. Not because business is bad, not because we're tired, but because we have to decide what kind of place we want this to be." Another silence. But this time, it was a full one, a powerful one. Then, slowly, Malik spoke. "You didn't have to do that." Rachel's eyes softened. "Yeah, I did." He gave a small nod, one hand tugging at the hem of his apron like he didn't quite know what to do with himself. And Rachel, tough, practical Rachel, stepped forward and placed a hand gently on his shoulder. "Don't ever think you're invisible here," she said. "Not to me, not to anyone who matters." The room was quiet, but it was no longer heavy. Something had cracked open, and through that crack, something honest and hard and right had begun to rise. The restaurant sat in stillness as dusk settled. The last of the diners had long gone, and the scent of garlic, rosemary, and something softer, grief maybe, still clung to the air like steam on cold glass. The chairs were stacked, the lights dimmed to a warm, amber glow. Only the soft hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of old floorboards reminded Rachel that time hadn't stopped. She sat in the corner booth by the window, her hands cradling a chipped mug of tea she hadn't touched. Across from her sat Malik, no longer in uniform. He had changed into a clean white t-shirt, but the strain of the day hadn't left his shoulders. He held himself like someone not used to being seen so clearly, especially not in a moment so raw. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable. It was full of something else. Recognition. Rachel exhaled slowly. "I want to tell you something," she said. Malik nodded once, unsure, respectful. "It's not something I've talked about much, not even with most of the staff. But I think you should know." She paused as if gathering weight in her lungs before lifting the memory. "Years ago, when I first wanted to open this place, I wasn't alone." Her gaze drifted toward the far wall, toward a black and white photo hanging just above the hostess stand. It showed a smiling man in a chef's coat, his arm wrapped loosely around Rachel's waist. His grin was wide, genuine, proud. "That's Marcus," she said softly. "My husband." Malik followed her gaze, the name settling in his memory like an anchor. "We had the idea together. Cedar and sage was our dream," she continued. "He cooked, I planned. He was magic in the kitchen. Not flashy, just pure. People loved his food even when they didn't want to love him." Her fingers tightened slightly around the mug. "We found a space, met with banks, applied for loans. Everything on paper looked perfect. But door after door slammed shut, not because the business plan was bad, Not because we were inexperienced, but because when Marcus walked in the room, the tone changed. She looked back at Malik, eyes glistening now. Sometimes they were polite about it, sometimes they weren't. One man told me point blank, "You'd have better luck opening this place without him." Malik's breath caught. Rachel nodded. I still remember the way Marcus smiled when he heard that. Not because it didn't hurt, but because he'd heard it before. He was used to it. Her voice cracked, then steadied again. We scraped everything together ourselves. Worked 2 jobs. Took night shifts. We fought for this place, but Marcus didn't live to see it open. He passed just 3 months before we got the keys. She stopped, breathing through the memory. Malik sat perfectly still, as if afraid to move would shatter something delicate in the air. I kept going because I had to. For him. For what we dreamed it could be. And I swore, on the first day we opened, that this would be a place where no one like Marcus would ever have to shrink themselves. Not ever again. Malik looked down, but not to hide. A single tear slid down his cheek, glistening like silver under the soft light. Rachel reached beneath the table and pulled out a small envelope. It was thick, cream-colored, and sealed with wax. Its weight clearly more than symbolic. She placed it gently in front of him. "I started this fund 2 years ago," she said. "Didn't tell anyone. Named it after Marcus." Malik looked at the envelope, unsure whether to touch it. "I didn't know who it was for, not really," Rachel added, "until I saw the way you carried those plates your first week here. Like service wasn't just a job. Like it meant something sacred." Her voice was barely above a whisper now. "This is for culinary school, for your future. For every table you'll someday command with your own food, your own name, your own worth." Malik stared at her, eyes brimming. "Rachel, I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," she said. "Just promise me something." He nodded, wiping his face with the back of his hand. "When you open your own kitchen one day, don't ever let anyone dim your light just because they can't stand to see it shine." He let out a breath that was half laugh, half sob. And then he reached for the envelope. His hands shook, but not with fear, with purpose, with something rekindled. The next morning, the sun rose gently over the awning of cedar and sage, casting soft golden light across the sidewalk and painting long shadows through the front windows. The closed sign that had stunned the neighborhood the day before now hung, reversed, open, catching the morning rays like a quiet promise. Inside, the staff had arrived early, wiping down tables with an unusual sense of anticipation. There was no heavy music, no small talk, just a feeling, alive and electric, that something had shifted, that maybe yesterday hadn't just been a pause but a declaration. Malik stepped through the front door just after 9 a.m., not in uniform, yet. His hair was freshly cut, his white shirt pressed. He moved with a subtle but undeniable change, shoulders a little straighter, chin a little higher. Not defiant, just unapologetically present. Rachel was already there, flipping silverware, into place, sleeves rolled to her elbows. She looked up when he entered and smiled. Not out of sympathy, but solidarity. But before Malik could even greet her, something outside caught his eye. A line, stretching down the sidewalk, mothers holding toddlers, elderly couples in Sunday best, young professionals still in gym clothes, a group of high school students with homemade signs that read, "We stand with Malik," and at the very front a man in a crisp navy suit holding a bouquet of fresh daisies and a handwritten card. Rachel stepped beside Malik at the window. "Word travels fast," he blinked. "Is this for us?" "No," she said quietly. "This is for you." By 10, every table was full. Not with regular customers only, but with new faces too, drawn by whispers that something good had happened. Here, that a line had been drawn in the quietest, bravest way, and that someone had chosen dignity over dollars. At the hostess stand, flowers began to pile up. Yellow tulips, white lilies, small wildflower bundles tied with ribbon. Tucked between the stems were notes, folded napkins with messages scribbled in pen. Thank you for showing my son what courage looks like. We'll be dining here more often. Your values matter. I was silent once when it happened to my coworker. I won't be again. Danielle, the hostess, wiped her eyes more than once as she tried to keep things organized. Malik moved between tables, delivering plates, with the same grace he always had, but now with something extra in every step. He wasn't just refilling water glasses or recommending the mushroom risotto. He was seen, not just as staff, but as someone worth standing up for. Customers greeted him by name. Children waved at him like he was the hero of a movie their parents had recounted the night before. An older woman gently touched his arm and said, "Thank you for staying. The world needs more people like you." He smiled, grateful and overwhelmed. In the back, Rachel peeked out from the kitchen, watching the dining room hum with warmth. It wasn't just full, it was alive. She leaned against the door frame, her heart fuller than it had been in years. Not because of profit, but because something sacred had been restored. That afternoon, a reporter from the local paper arrived. She asked to speak with the owner, then with Malik. Rachel kept the conversation brief. "This isn't a story about a scandal," she said. "It's about choice, about deciding that if we serve food with love, we won't let hate sit at the table, not even for a moment." Malik, nervous at first, had only one thing to add. "I'm still learning. But yesterday I found out that I'm not alone, and that changes everything." The article ran the next day. Restaurant shuts down. Over racial bias. Reopens to community's love. And beneath the headline, a photo of Malik holding a tray of food, smiling, not out of duty, but pride. By the end of the week, donations to the Marcus Carter Culinary Scholarship had poured in, enough to sponsor another student after Malik. Woman who had been dining that day, quiet, observant, and deeply moved, offered Rachel free PR consulting for the restaurant. "What you did," she said, "shouldn't be a secret." But for Rachel, no campaign would ever mean more than the silence that followed her words that day in the break room, or the way Malik looked her in the eye now, grateful, sure of his place. She knew he would move on eventually, to culinary school, to his own kitchen, to something greater. But for now, he belonged here, seen, defended, lifted. And as the sun began to dip below the horizon again, casting that same golden glow across the now bustling restaurant, Rachel flipped off the porch light and leaned on the doorframe, watching the tables glow with laughter and life. A small sign hung near the hostess stand now, handwritten, framed in simple oak. Courage isn't always loud. Sometimes it's a quiet closing sign on a sunny day, telling the world that dignity is non-negotiable. And everyone who walked through those doors, black, white, old, young, stranger, or friend, would see it and feel it and maybe carry it with them.